Evening. It's a true pleasure to be here with you all in Brazil this evening on part of this journey that attempts to answer three basic and broad and in effect overarching questions. How does cannabis work? What is the evidence? And can it work for me and those in my care? And in this relatively short segment, we'll set the stage that will focus on the center question: what is the evidence? So it's possible to make more informed and discerning decisions about if the use of cannabis is thought to work for a particular condition or not. And so with that, I'd like to start sharing my screen and dive right in. So what is the evidence? So that is a question that you hear in a policy making discussion. This is what a key question that you keep on hearing in the halls of academia. And this is what you hear in the clinical setting of medicine. And there are schools of thoughts on either side of the debate. And so let me move to the next slide and go to PubMed, one of the largest repositories of scientific literature in the world. And if you punch in the keyword marijuana, just a single word, you get over 35,000 individual papers that are associated with a single plant. Now, the rapid growth of the Cannabinoid Health Sciences ever since the late 80s, when the first endocannabinoid receptors were discovered and the first papers were beginning to be published in a number of journals in the early 90s, has grown significantly from year to year. Last year, over 3,700 individual papers have been published in a single year alone, which translates to roughly about 10 trials that are being published on a daily basis that we can use, we can utilize, we can use to provide context to make more informed and discerning decision if cannabis is thought to work for a particular patient population or not. So how does this amount of studies translate actually to individual patient populations? How many of these tens of thousands of studies translate into individual conditions? And so I tried to put them all into a single slide, but I failed because PowerPoint just doesn't give me enough space. What you're looking at right now are the live links of CannaKeys that are listed in alphabetical order from A through Z. And so in other words, what you're looking at is a near complete list of nearly 250, mostly chronic conditions for which cannabinoid-based therapeutics show novel treatment potential. Now, not every single condition, of course, contains the same amount of trials and data behind them. There are some conditions that are at most have a handful of trials behind them. And there are some conditions that have over 100 individual trials behind them. The same is true for clinical evidence versus preclinical evidence. So the degrees of confidence that can be assigned to determine if cannabis is right for a particular patient population can vary greatly between the clinical data that backs up and gives us actionable information and preclinical data that is beginning to show us trends, but where the confidence level isn't quite high. Now, that does not mean that the preclinical data isn't beginning to show us trends that we can use to make more and smarter decisions about if and how to progress with cannabis in the treatment of one or any of these particular condition. In fact, I'd like to go back one more time and see if I can locate it. Dr. Lesser just talked about psychosis and talked about schizophrenia. Here we have schizophrenia. Here we have psychosis. And I think you also talked about extrapyramidal reactions. And I do not see it. I think it's classified under a different name. So if you were to click on psychosis, or if you were to click on schizophrenia, what you would get is something that looks like this. On the right side, you'll see a dashboard that opens up once you click on that. And in this case, we used Alzheimer's as an example, but it's the same for schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is a fascinating topic to look at the data that's come out in psychosis research. And it's just really wonderful to see the progress that has been made, for patient populations who are not really well served by orthodox treatment methodologies, or where the adverse effects are sometimes prohibitive in terms of being able to treat a patient with the pharmaceutical drug regimens. And but since this slide is talking about Alzheimer's, let's use Alzheimer's as an example. One of the important things to realize when you're looking at the totality of trials is that you want to define what trials did specifically examine the modulating components of the endocannabinoid system in the treatment of this particular disease. And so this number 52 primary studies indicates there are 52 trials that have currently been identified where modulating components of the endocannabinoid system can make a therapeutic inroad into mitigating signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. There's another column here called related studies. There are another 42 related studies that maybe have been conducted in researching a number of other neurological diseases like Parkinson's or Huntington's or multiple sclerosis or epilepsy. All of them are related and in some way have overlapping pathologies, but then didn't really focus primarily on the disease, on Alzheimer's disease. And so we felt it was an important thing to show the distinction between primary studies, which if I was a physician or a researcher is where I would want to look first. And then if I still need to do a deeper dive, then I would look at the associated studies, the related studies, to see if I can gain a deeper understanding. So in total, what we have is 94 studies. 52 directly examined the underlying pathologies of Alzheimer's, and the endocannabinoid system. Now, these two columns, clinical trials and preclinical trials, give you the breakdown of only the primary studies. So we have, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, 2 double-blind placebo-controlled trials. And then when it comes to most of the other of the trials that are listed in the primary setting, we have the breakdown of meta-analysis, reviews, experts' opinion, individual case studies, case series. We have 13 animal trials that have been conducted in animal models of Alzheimer's disease. And then, of course, there are the lab tests that have been done basically in the Petri dish. Now, the other thing that becomes critically relevant in terms of understanding the state of the science for each of these conditions for which cannabinoid or for which cannabis shows therapeutic potential has to do with being able to look at a glance what is the totality of studies telling us about the potential therapeutic effects? And in this case, the overall positive results are in the 90s, and the overall clinical results reflecting only these two double-blind trials was 100% effective in terms of producing therapeutic effects in this patient population. Now, when it in some other incidences, like for example, if this were schizophrenia, for example, you would see the overall positive results probably dip significantly, because there's such a division of trials that produced either positive, meaning produced therapeutic effects. Then there are trials that produce certainly negative effects, and there are trials that produce mixed or inconclusive results. So that will affect the number of the overall positive results. But the good thing is, and this is what I wanted to call out, is that at a glance you have the state of the science available by looking at the dashboard. Now, the other thing that is important, and that has to do with chemotype-based prescribing. And so in this case, the chemotypes that were used in all of these 52 trials are roughly equally divided into a chemotype 3 that is primarily containing CBD or CBD only, and roughly divided into research that has utilized THC abundant or THC only chemotypes. And then there is a small slice of the pie that indicates the use of a chemotype 2, which contains a roughly balanced ratio between THC and CBD. So at a glance, you can tell instantly that most of the clinical trials associated with Alzheimer's are either a chemotype 3, mostly CBD, or either a chemotype 1 with containing mostly THC. Now, I just threw up the slide here. If everybody's tempted to do a consultation with Dr. Google occasionally. And so when you punch in the keywords cannabis and Alzheimer's, you get an excess of 114 million individual trials. And nobody in their right mind has the time or the lifetimes to go through this. I just did a thought exercise. I went through the first 100 links, and I just clicked them and opened them up, and ended up more confused and feeling chaotic than getting helpful and trustworthy and annotated information that is going to allow me to make up my mind if cannabis is thought to work for Alzheimer's disease or not. And so, having said that, I wanted to do a couple more comparison between PubMed and the CannaKeys platform. When you use the keyword, when you use the keywords Alzheimer's and cannabis in PubMed, you get 108, roughly in this case, you get 118 results for Alzheimer's. Over here in CannaKeys, we have, we have a total of 94 total results. And so remember the breakdown that when you use CannaKeys, you get the breakdown of primary trials, related trials. And then the difference between the 94 and the 118 have to do with false positives that still creep on into the PubMed data bank, which you have to weed out and weed through. So what's nice about using CannaKeys is you get all the primary studies listed with the latest up on top, and then the older publications towards the bottom. Now, if you were to click, and I can't do this because it's a fixed slide, if you were to click on the details of each of these trials, you get the key findings, and you get very specific information that are relevant to making clinical decisions. And we'll talk about it just a little on the next slide. There's a little bit more information. But the other thing I wanted to say, once you click through for more data, more focused data, there's also a click through just like the way you would have on PubMed, where you get to the abstract or the full text of that trial. And that allows you to, to go for a deeper study of the data that is published in that particular trial. Now, the other thing we felt is essential when looking at the available scientific literature is, yes, of course, it's essential to have access to the abstract or being able to click through and to go to PubMed Central and actually get the free trial if it was published after 1980, I believe. And so while that is important, what's perhaps even more important, that we'll get a bird's eye view, a synopsis, if you will, of not just one trial or one abstract of one study, but a synopsis of all of the available data of all the 52 primary trials that looked at Alzheimer's and modulating components of the endocannabinoid system in order to produce either palliative or modulatory effects for these patient populations. And so we've done this. We've created a synopsis for all of these individual nearly 250 conditions for which cannabis shows promise, to give you that bird's eye view, to give you the context that you can use as a backdrop to see, how far the evidence has progressed and where the holes are and where still a lot of research needs to be done. But it also will make it easier for you to begin to understand the individual components that are involved, that have been discovered so far, and the trends, the emerging trends and treatment trends that come out of it. For instance, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, when to treat the nighttime agitation, for example, and insomnia, it has turned out that THC-based products or chemotype 1s are very helpful to reduce nighttime agitation. For the daytime, actually has turned out that a number of CBD-based products or chemotype 3-based products are wonderful in gently uplifting the mood of these patient populations, and in that sense provide an increase in quality of life and quality of well-being. Now, the other two clinically critically important consideration have to do with dosage and with drug interactions. Whenever possible, whenever there have been clinical primary trials that list specific dosages that have been used in each of these trials, we will list them in a separate page that you can click on. So at a glance, you can see the very specific dosages that they used in the clinical trials and the key findings. Either did they produce positive effects, did it make the symptoms worse, or were the results mixed or inconclusive? In case there isn't any specific dosing considerations that's applicable to that specific condition that we're highlighting in the dashboard, we have used the dosing consideration of the totality of clinical trials that have been conducted to provide you with a step criteria to determine what is a low dose. What are these clinical trials telling us about an extreme low dose or a micro dose? What is considered a low dose for THC? What's considered a medium dose for THC? And what is considered a high dose for THC? And the same is true for CBD dosing considerations. The other thing that I wanted to quickly point out has to do with drug interactions. Whenever there has been specific studies on drug interactions of specific cannabinoids, but primarily THC and CBD, we are calling that out, and we're creating a summary that makes it really easy to be able to determine, so that if you're co-prescribing pharmaceuticals, that you can tell very quickly if THC or if CBD is going to increase the bioavailability of these pharmaceutical drugs or decrease them, so you can keep that in your mind as a reference and adjust your prescriptions accordingly, or the patient monitoring accordingly. And here's another thing that I wanted to draw your attention to. When you go to the CannaKeys platform, which, by the way, we are very happy to be able to bring to what WeCann Academy is offering to its students. We are very excited that you have access to the entire platform for free for the duration of your studies with WeCann Academy. So one of the things, as somebody who has been immersed in reading thousands of trials over the past decades, one of the things I always wished for, and I was never able to get, is what you see on the right here and down what you see down here, which is a dynamically generated filter option that shifts from condition to condition based on the data that was discovered in each of the primary trials associated with each condition. So what that tells you, if you look at a glance at all the filter options, it tells you that these are the moving parts of the endocannabinoid system as far as receptor sites, ligands, terpenes, chemotypes, and study results as far as being recorded as making the condition worse, producing therapeutic effects, or producing mixed or inconclusive results. So if you, for example, are an oncologist and you understand, you're up on your research, and you understand that, let's say, there are 3 types of cancer: ovarian cancer, colon cancer, and triple negative breast cancer. That recent research has indicated that the metastases of these 3 types of cancer in part relies on activation of G protein coupled receptor 55. So right here you have GPCR 55. Now it happens so that THC is an agonist at 55. And so until we know for sure, until the research that's out there tells us that the other potential anti-cancer effects of THC that are generated via other receptor sites or other mechanisms outweigh the potential harmful effects of 55 activation, logic would dictate that we switch to a chemotype 3, because CBD is an antagonist at 55, which is, a wonderful and important piece of knowledge you can use to fine-tune your cannabis prescription in terms of chemotype choices, and in that sense make them the most informed decisions that you can make based on the most recently available study results that have come out for these 3 patient populations. Now, what's really nice and exciting is that you are able to filter, you can be able to click on each of these fields. So if you're interested in CD1 and everything having to do with one particular condition, if it shows up as an option, you can click on it and will only show you the primary trials associated with CB1. Same is true for any of the dynamically generated click boxes that you'll see. So with that in mind, and I don't want to spend too much time because I think my time is running out, I wanted to just briefly summarize that in order to harness the scientific literature to work towards optimal patient's outcome, it will involve a process that ideally initiates the identification of primary trials, the separation of related studies, the elimination of false positives, and the weighing of studies. And so we applied 3 weights. The first weight is the weight of determining what's a primary trial and what's a secondary trial. The second weight is applied depending on what type of trial it is. A lab test, it gets the lowest weight, and a double-blind placebo-controlled trial gets the highest weight. Because why? 10% of all lab trials, is what has been found to be. Let me paraphrase. Only 10% of clinically relevant research trends that come from the Petri dish will eventually translate into the clinical setting. Now, animal trials, the percentage is much higher. When you go up to case studies, the percentage gets much higher. And so that is why we decided to apply these 3 weights, in order to determine the most valuable dashboard setting. And then, of course, lastly, it will have to include a practical summary that includes a synopsis, dosing consideration, drug interactions, warnings, and of course, since the rapid increase of trials on a virtually daily basis, can yield fantastic results that weren't perhaps available yesterday. Frequent updates are an absolute necessity. And with that in mind, we are just here in Berkeley, California, Doug and Dave and our other members. We are very excited to partner with CannaKeys, with WeCann Academy, to work together as kindred spirits, and all of you to make it possible and make it as elegant and easy as possible to utilize the scientific literature to make the most discerning and informed decision possible, so that you can stay on one side of the fine line between a therapeutic and an adverse effect. And with that in mind, I'll pass the baton back to Patricia.
Muitíssimo obrigada pela tua exposição, simplesmente brilhante. Eu tenho que falar aqui que estou embasbacada também com a clareza de ideias, raciocínio, colocações. Realmente é ferramenta de potencial disruptivo. Repetindo as palavras aqui do Dr. Harry, realmente você é um dos gigantes da medicina endocannabinoide, e a gente se sente muitíssimo honrado de contar com você como expert aqui da WeCann Academy, e contando também com os frutos desse trabalho grandioso, né, de muitos anos de estudo e dedicação a essa ciência. Hoje é um dia muito especial, gente, para quem estuda medicina endocannabinoide, especialmente aqui para os colegas do Brasil. A WeCann Academy tem o prazer e a honra de firmar uma parceria oficial com o CannaKeys, a primeira, mais completa e mais atualizada ferramenta de busca e análise de artigos científicos em medicina endocannabinoide e cannabis medicinal do mundo, totalmente dedicada a desvendar essa ciência. E o que significa essa parceria para os alunos da WeCann? Significa que os nossos alunos serão as primeiras pessoas da América Latina a terem acesso a essa ferramenta de busca incrível e completa, que vem a promover uma verdadeira revolução no acesso ao estudo dessa ciência e facilitar a vida de todos nós médicos, que somos eternos estudiosos, pesquisadores de novas e promissoras formas de cuidar, de tratar. Os alunos da WeCann que estão aqui com a gente, comenta aí no chat o que vocês acharam desse presentão. Uwe, como cofundador, diretor científico da CannaKeys e agora também como expert da WeCann Academy, o que você tem a dizer aí sobre essa parceria entre a WeCann e o CannaKeys? Chegou para ele a pergunta? Uwe?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thank you so much for your kind words. It feels really nice to hear.
Great. I asked you, in your words, what is the meaning of this partnership with WeCann Academy and CannaKeys?
To us, it means a lot because we have been primarily focused on the United States and the individual states to help people and policymakers and physicians to really get access to the trials in a meaningful and in a critical way, so that they can use these tools at their fingertips, to bring about the change, to bring access to so many different patient populations suffering from chronic diseases, where in the orthodox setting, the best that they can hope for is management until the end of their life with an ever-growing list of pharmaceuticals. And so we wanted to be part of pushing that door that lets the light of hope into the world, especially for these patient populations, because it's not just that working with cannabis, but understanding endocannabinoid science and the endocannabinoid system allows us to not just bring physical aspects into dealing with patients, but to address the whole patient from a mind-body perspective. Because the overlap between mind-body medicine and orthodox medicine, the way I see it, the endocannabinoid system or endocannabinoid health sciences is the missing link that creates a whole system of medicine that Dr. Harry was talking about, as far as bringing other traditions into the picture and learning from all of what these traditions have to offer, and in that sense, bring novel opportunities and novel treatment options to the table that are many times not just safer but also more effective. And here's another thing that is just fascinating to me. An annual supply of Epidiolex to treat pediatric seizure disorders that are refractory to orthodox anti-epileptics costs about $20,000 a year here in the United States, which is a huge amount. You can grow the plant if you have a pot or if you have a little garden. You can grow a Charlotte's Web that contains primarily CBD. Make your own tincture. It doesn't take much to learn. And you have an annual supply at your fingertips, working with your doctor, finding the optimal dosage points, and then either supplement or treat, not just the pediatric epilepsy refractory to anti-epileptics, but so many other mood disorders. The sky's the limit for so far up to 250 mostly chronic conditions. And so with that in mind, to us, it's very exciting to be able to talk to Brazil. And it's very exciting to meet so many kindred spirits, who are doing the same work and to collaborate. And, it's not just exciting, but it's also a lot of fun for us. And so to us, it means a wonderful list of adjectives and verbs that come to mind. So thank you for having us as partners, and we'll be very much looking forward to working with all of you.
A gente que agradece, Uwe, é incrível. A gente está muito feliz com essa parceria, que sem dúvida nenhuma vai ser um grande diferencial para os colegas médicos que desejam se aprofundar no assunto, no tema, se educar e descobrir, né, toda a ciência que tem por trás dessa ferramenta terapêutica. Então, gente, vocês que tinham alguma dúvida, né, se a nossa certificação seria ou não a melhor para você, eu acredito que agora suas dúvidas acabaram. Quem é o nosso aluno já sabe que a gente não está aqui para apenas vender um curso online. A WeCann Academy é uma verdadeira parceira da sua jornada de aprendizado, nesse conhecimento de potencial disruptivo, cujo propósito maior é melhorar a qualidade de vida de centenas de milhares de pacientes que hoje sofrem por não terem alívio com as terapêuticas habituais. No final do dia, o que a gente quer é fazer juntos um mundo melhor. Gente, com pouco mais de 20 anos de descoberta dos receptores endocannabinoides, Hoje já tem mais de 20 mil artigos publicados no PubMed sobre o sistema canabinoide, o potencial terapêutico dos canabinoides. No clinicaltrials.gov tem mais de 500 ensaios clínicos sobre o uso de derivados canabinoides para fins medicinais. Mas com esses milhares de artigos publicados em curto espaço de tempo, é um grande desafio para o médico se manter atualizado, né? E também é um desafio a gente ter um acesso fácil a esses estudos de maior relevância estatística e qualidade metodológica. Está aí a importância dessa plataforma para os médicos que estudam medicina endocannabinoide. Então, a gente está muito feliz com essa parceria. O CannaKeys é uma plataforma, gente, que oferece o acesso fácil à ciência publicada, que explora os dados críticos dos principais e mais qualificados artigos científicos e ajuda os médicos, os profissionais de saúde a organizar, sistematizar esse conhecimento de forma apropriada. Esse é o propósito da WeCann, ajudar médicos a acessarem esse conhecimento disruptivo, a incorporar novas ferramentas terapêuticas, sempre com base em evidência científica e na experiência de um corpo técnico altamente qualificado. Muito mais que uma certificação, a gente proporciona aos nossos alunos um ambiente seguro, protegido, para discutir casos clínicos, aplicar o seu conhecimento na prática, porque nós somos parceiros da sua jornada de aprendizado. Pessoal, a gente vai abrir para perguntas aí para o público. Ó, o Xerxes perguntando aí como acessar a plataforma via site WeCann. Xerxes, a WeCann é parceiro oficial da CannaKeys para os nossos ex-alunos da primeira turma e para os novos alunos da segunda jornada de certificação internacional em medicina endocannabinoide da WeCann. Nós vamos liberar um mês de acesso gratuito à plataforma CannaKeys e depois desse um mês nós vamos oferecer condições especiais para aqueles que são alunos do WeCann, ex-alunos do WeCann. E de novo vai ser tudo em primeira mão, vocês vão ser os primeiros da América Latina a acessar essa ferramenta. Mais perguntas do público? Legal. Uwe, tem uma pergunta aí para você. Quando você começou a desbravar esse conhecimento, quais foram as suas principais fontes de aprendizado? Por onde você começou? Essa pergunta aí é muito importante porque eu tive muita dificuldade de estruturar esse aprendizado no início. E eu tenho curiosidade de saber, você que começou muito antes, né, muitos anos atrás, deve ter sido mais difícil ainda.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I had the fortune to serve in an EMS, emergency medical setting in San Francisco, and my first contact with cannabis had to do with seeing patients returning from chemotherapy treatment or radiation treatment from cancer. And San Francisco in those days was one of the focal points for cannabis coming to the forefront. As far as being made available as legal medicine, or in those days it wasn't legal, but there were a lot of advocates and a lot of policymakers that saw the value of it, and a lot of science was beginning to emerge, and so some physicians supported their patients and their patients' use of cannabis or cannabinoid-based therapeutics to mitigate the adverse effects from cancer treatments. And so seeing the difference between a patient that has been treated with cannabis and one that hasn't, even though their cancer pathologies or progression was somewhat similar, was mind-boggling, and so that was my first contact, in terms of the impact it had on individual cancer populations. And like most everybody, if you work in medicine, your friends will come to you and will ask you, well, I have this, and do you think this treatment will work? And so my friends were asking me, well, do you think cannabis can work for this, or cannabis can work for that? And I said, well, let me look. And so as a favor to a friend, I would go and consult with Dr. Google, or I would go to PubMed, and I would sort of like do a rudimentary a basic analysis. It's like, there's like a handful of studies that I said, and some said yes, it works. Some said, well, we're not sure. And but what's the harm that could be done looking at the potential adverse effects compared to pharmaceutical drugs? It was relatively safe. And so and then 3 months later, somebody else would ask me the same question, and I still had my notes. And, I would update the notes, and then it turned from one condition, it turned to 2 to 3, until I had my first book, the Cannabis Health Index, with, containing 100 conditions for which cannabinoid-based therapeutics may show promise. And that was 4 years ago. So the first 6 years, I was just, playing with the data, playing with the people that I knew, and here's another tidbit of information that you may not know, is I was suffering from PTSD after doing emergency work for 17 years, and I had to quit. And I actually cultivated cannabis and utilized it myself, and it played a big part in returning to a normal state of well-being. And so that is another reason why my inner circle of friends would come to me and ask questions, because they had, different challenges as far as their health was concerned, but they knew what I was doing. And so they that's where they thought it's a fertile ground. Ask Uwe, maybe he'll be able to, shine a light on it and get me started on doing my own research. And that is sort of like the origin story that then led to the Cannabis Health Index, which I'm doing the second edition right now, and it's gotten so big that I can't put more than 200 conditions in the book. But that's why we did the online version, the platform, because print you can't keep up fast enough with the studies that are published on a daily basis. And so while I still love learning from a book, and while I still, like to hold data in my hand and read it, it became very quickly very clear that an online platform is needed to really be at the cutting edge of the cannabinoid health sciences and its rapid progression.
Great. Muitíssimo obrigada, Uwe, por toda a tua dedicação aí nesses anos de estudo e por facilitar o caminho dos que vieram depois, né? Realmente uma plataforma como essa facilita muitíssimo a organização do estudo, e inclusive um aluno nosso aqui colocou no chat que estava há muito tempo procurando, né, onde estudar esse tema tão fascinante, e que encontrou na WeCann essa busca, e a WeCann se alegra muito de melhorar ainda mais a entrega desse aprendizado através dessa parceria com o CannaKeys.